migration. That's what this section of notes is called. And your essential question is the same essential question that we had last time. It is, what determines settlement in North America? And there's a lot of different things. I'm not looking for just one aspect, I'm looking for all over. All right, and today we're going to be looking at in regards of migration. I've got this divided up into two different parts. The first part, we're going to look at the United States, migration that's going on in the United States, and then we're going to look at Canada and the migration that's going on in Canada. Now, the first portion, sub-region that we're going to look at in the United States is the northeastern United States. This is known as America's Gateway. There's a couple of reasons. The first reason that this is known as America's Gateway is this is one of the first areas of settlement of North America whenever the Europeans came down. Now, also, and then American South, there was settlement as well. But in regards to some of the first, this was this time period. It's also known as America's Gateway because it's the gateway for millions of immigrants during the 19th and 20th centuries into the United States. Fishing and farming is still real big in the Northeast. That's why people come here a lot of times. You also have a lot of industries, especially in Pennsylvania in the Northeast. You have steel, iron ore, coal, mining, those types of industries. That's why we have the Pittsburgh Steelers, okay, coming from this area. But that's starting to change, and it's starting to rust and be known as the Rust Belt, which we'll get to here a little bit later, because that's going to make people migrate as well. The next thing in the Northeast is we have some of the only megalopolises in the United States in the Northeast. The example that I've given you here, first off, a megalopolis is when a lot of cities come together and start to become one big city. It's when cities are growing together. Bowash is the example of the megalopolis in the Northeast. This is from Boston to New York City to Philadelphia, all the way down into Washington, D.C., all coming together for one megalopolis. The next area that we're looking at in the United States is the Midwest. The Midwest is the agricultural heartland of the United States. This is where most of the United States agriculture is grown. It's known as the breadbasket. This is where corn, wheat, soybean, meat, and other dairy products mostly are grown in the United States. It's also known as the industrial heartland in the United States because of its central location and because of its location next to waterways. Transportation becomes a lot easier, and these factories become very successful because of their location in the Midwest. But this is starting to change. We're starting to have a changing face of the Midwest, and you're starting to see a lot less farms. You're starting to see a lot less industries, and you're starting to see a lot of people in the tertiary economic sector of the economic activities. And these industries are starting to move a little bit more west, and they're able to do that because of things like air conditioning and other transportation routes. Moving right along, the next two sub-regions that we're looking at is the South and the West. The South, I've got the Old South and the New South up here. What the Old South is talking about is this is the South that the Europeans came in and migrated to. Because of this migration, you have diverse population groups. Not only do you have European culture come in, you've got Native American culture already here, you've got American culture from people migrating, as well as the culture of the slave groups that came in, all of this converging a very diverse people groups. This Old South was known as the Sun Belt, as well as the Southwest. It was also called the Sun Belt, dealing with the heat that was revolved around this, and this is kind of starting to change with the New South. With the New South, agriculture is still a big part of the area, so is livestock, but it's becoming more and more urbanized, more and more of a metropolitan area, and more people are involved in the tertiary economic activity within the New South itself. And because of things like air conditioning, people are able to move here, and because of industrialization, people are moving here. And because of this air conditioning, the Rust Belt, the people from the Midwest, this Rust Belt area, people are migrating down into the South because they're able to live there now. Next area that we're looking at is the West. Migration to the West. This was able to take place because of things like the Transcontinental Railroad, when people were able to go across. And again, what I keep coming back to is things like air conditioning has allowed people to live in the West when normally it was really too hot. And also irrigation. This is a very dry area, the West. And so because of irrigation, you can pump water to these areas and people can farm when used to that wasn't a possibility because it was just way too. Now moving away from the United States and moving to Canada, which is the other region or the other country within North America that we're looking at. There's different types of migration. The first is with the early peoples that came across the Beringia Land Strait. These were the Asian nomads that moved into the area, and it's kind of what the Inuit, the Eskimo, Inuktitut, it's those people that are still living in these areas from this movement of peoples. The next is kind of the colonization era. Now, I've got a question here, but most of the colonization went on in the East, and I'd like you to kind of ponder that, or why this went on in the East. Why colonization took place in the East. The reason that is the case is because of migration. Most of the settlers that came and colonized the area were from Europe. Canada, the eastern side, is facing Europe, so that migration took place in that region. Now next, Great Britain and France are kind of the main countries that are in the area of Canada. Think back to the French and Indian War and kind of that conflict that went on. Now moving on away from periods of history in two areas within Canada and the migration because of it, we've got the Atlantic provinces. Now the reason that provinces is underlined is I want you to differentiate that between states. In the United States, we have states that separate governmental bodies and separate groups of people. In Canada, you have provinces, and most of the time they're a lot bigger than states within the United States. The Atlantic provinces, which is the provinces on the Atlantic coastal region, there's not a lot of people there. Very small populations because of the harsh land and the harsh climate. Further north you go, the colder it gets, the less people you see, as well as the landscape itself. It's very, very rugged. It's not flat. And so most people live in the coastal cities and they don't live inland because of the harsh land conditions. And then it's not very flat, which is what people want to live in. The next is your economic activities. The economic activities that revolve around the Atlantic regions is you're looking at your logging, your fishing, as well as your hydroelectric power from the movement of water. Now the next type of province is the core provinces. Key word here that I want you to see is core, the middle. Think of your heart. The middle, this is where most of what's going on and the success of Canada is coming from, is these core provinces. It is the heartland, which is what I've got the heart here for. 3/5, every 3 out of 5 people in Canada live in one of the core provinces. And most of the settlement of the core provinces is in the middle of Canada, in the southern portion, middle of Canada, around the Great Lakes, because of its nearness to the United States, as well as its latitude. It's further south, so it's warmer. Okay? These are your political and economic centers of Canada. This is where your success is coming from. This is where most of the money is being made. Ontario and Quebec are good examples of some of these core provinces. And they basically rule Canadian economics and governance. The last 2 regions within Canada that we're going to be looking at in the movement of people is the Prairie provinces and the Pacific provinces and the territories. In the Prairie provinces, I want you to look at it just like that. This is your prairie areas. Because of that, this is Canada's breadbasket. This is where 50% of the agricultural production comes from. It's right here in the breadbasket of Canada. This is a very cultural mix of peoples, and I've got 3 questions here. I want you to kind of think about as we're going through this cultural mix of people. Is it cultural convergence, divergence, or assimilation? From this mix of peoples, you've got Scots-Irish, Germans, Scandinavians, Ukrainians, Poles, as well as some of the Inuit people and the Eskimos of the region, as well as British and French coming in the area. Now, what you have going on within the breadbasket and this mix of people is you have cultural divergence. I mean, not divergence, cultural convergence, because these cultures are coming together, blending, and the people groups are starting to look like each other, physically as well as culturally. The last group of provinces that I've got here is your Pacific provinces and the territories. The Pacific province is kind of British Columbia represents this. In British Columbia, you have a lot of logging and mining and hydroelectric power, which is a lot of like some of these other areas as well. And because of these different types of industries, you do have a lot of people in the Pacific provinces. Most migration within Canada itself has come from east to west over time, and you're starting to get more and more people into these Pacific provinces than ever before. The last kind of section that we've got is the territories. 41% of land mass is in these territories, but there's not enough people to call them provinces. There's not enough people to have independent government bodies, so they're referred to as territories because there's a lot of land, but there's not really a lot of people. Last slide, and we got one more topic. Extreme weather. Now you've got Tornado Alley in this region, which makes people move. This is kind of the central region, and what this is you've got warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico that's mixing with dry and a lot of times cold air coming down from Canada that's hitting the Rocky Mountains and coming around, and this mixture of air is then creating this tornado alley where you do have a lot of tornadoes. We also see a lot of hurricanes. You see hurricanes on the Pacific coast, the western side of the United States, as well as the eastern coast. And sometimes they even make their way into Canada, which is very rare, but in the United States you have them. The last extreme weather condition of this region, especially Canada, is it's just too dang cold. And a lot of these areas, you can't even go from your house to your mailbox without freezing to death if you don't have enough clothes on. And like me, I like to run out there in my boxers, but I would freeze to death.